Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Priscilla. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
Trigger warning. This movie contains depictions of a 24-year-old man dating a 14-year-old girl, arguable grooming, drug abuse, attempted rape, possible fortunately failed second-degree manslaughter, and big hair. Sarah, did I leave anything out?
You did not. Rena, can you please give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned. Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about Priscilla Presley and the movie Priscilla?
Sure thing. Priscilla Ann Presley is an American businesswoman and actress. She is the ex-wife of American singer Elvis Presley, as well as the co-founder and former chairperson of Elvis Presley Enterprises, the company that turned Graceland into one of the top tourist attractions in the United States. In her acting career, Presley co-starred with Leslie Nielsen in the Naked Gun film trilogy and played Jenna Wade on the long-running television series Dallas. She is the mother of Lisa Marie Presley and the grandmother of Riley Keough. The movie Priscilla is a 2023 biographical drama film written, directed, and produced by Sofia Coppola, based on Elvis and Me. It follows the life of Priscilla Presley and her complicated romantic relationship with Elvis Presley. It stars Cailee, Spaeny, and Jacob Elordi. And Priscilla premiered at the Venice International Film Festival, and it was released in the U.S. in October of 2023, received very positive reviews from critics. It grossed $23 million worldwide, and Cailee Spainey's performance received a number of awards, including a Best Actress nomination at the Golden Globes.
I read Elvis and Me. This movie hews pretty closely to the book.
So I've not read Elvis and Me. This is so controversial. I'm a Sofia Coppola stan. I love her work. She's a true auteur. I like the way she makes a movie. But one of the things that I felt was I felt like I really didn't get a good look inside of Priscilla that much because her work is so sort of observational and looking from the outside in, and is also very rarely loud and aggressive. So I was kind of like, what is she feeling as this is happening? Because, like, do you have any strong feelings about Elvis? I guess is my first question.
I appreciate him. I'm more of a Beatles person.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of the things I learned researching this is that the Beatles did meet Elvis, and they jammed together, and the Colonel refused to allow a microphone in the room.
Ugh, Colonel. He's the worst.
One of the things I appreciated about this movie is that it's very much through a female lens, and it's Priscilla's story. It does not try to cram Elvis's story into it, and that the Colonel, that loathsome man, is on the other end of a phone line.
I'm sure at some point we'll get to Elvis, the Baz Luhrmann movie, but Tom Hanks. Have you seen the Elvis movie?
I started watching it and I found Tom Hanks unbearable to watch in that.
The Colonel is unbearable, and it's an unbearable framing device because the character of the Colonel is repulsive. I'm glad that this was a Colonel-free experience because he's at best discomforting, but really like a super sinister figure who groomed a child, who in this movie grooms a child. I appreciate what Elvis is, but I don't find him that personally compelling. I think a lot of the women around him are super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think Priscilla Presley is a really interesting person, and I have a lot of questions for her that have nothing to do with this movie. I think that Lisa Marie Presley was a very interesting woman. And I think that Riley Keough, his granddaughter, is an incredibly gifted actress. I think that she's really, really good.
She was
At
so good in Zola.
So good in Zola, so good in this miniseries Under the Bridge. She was also really good in Paterno was the name of it. She played the journalist. She's also really good in Mad Max Fury Road. But anyway, I just think that a lot of like the lore of Elvis is the result of women who have very carefully carried the flame for him. I dare you to sit down and listen to a bunch of his music back to back and not be like, wow, this goes nowhere and it progresses nowhere artistically. He's kind of a showman. But also, I don't get it.
Well, it's also that aren't any great Elvis albums because he recorded whatever it was profitable for the Colonel to throw at him. There's a lot of bad Elvis material out there, and he was never really a part of that flowering of album-oriented rock that came about in the mid to late 60s.
Also, there's been so many pieces of filmic art created about Elvis that try and kind of unpack him. And I'm always just kind of left feeling like he was like a blank slate of a human, not a terribly interesting person, but the people around him are. And so I liked this for that reason.
So this may be the first film that we've done since Rocket Man where the subject is still alive. We've done other films where there are characters who are still alive.
It's interesting to think about. Priscilla Presley has greenlit projects in which she is a character in them. To think about like sort of standing off to the side and watching all of this unfold is fascinating because this isn't like, I know I'm forever slamming them. This isn't like a James Mangold or, a Taylor Hackford movie where they don't have an auteur perspective on things, and Sofia Coppola very much does, and she is, to entrust your story into her hands and be like, I'm going to let you make this your story, because that's what she does, and that's what an auteur does with even a personal subject. Is they take it and they're like, this is now my story, and I will be telling it the way that I want to tell it.
I appreciated that it is an intimate story. It is through a female lens, and Priscilla doesn't whitewash Elvis. I'm constantly shocked. Like, he really waited until they were married. Like, that's...
Yeah.
So, we open on a shot of perfectly pedicured feet crossing an expanse of the thickest, springiest looking wall-to-wall shag carpeting I've ever seen. My first thought was, how do you even vacuum that? Just like all the things that could get stuck between the fibers. I detest wall-to-wall, but Elvis is an aesthetic. The opening credits play out over a series of shots of a very elaborate beauty routine, followed by shots of scenery specific to the Graceland interiors, such as Elvis's fan mail and gold records. We see a bouquet of roses, so we sense that she may be getting ready for her wedding, but we aren't sure. Cut to a U.S. Air Force base in West Germany, 1959, where 14-year-old Priscilla is drinking soda pop at the counter in the Eagle Club.
Couple of things on this. So first of all, the feet reminded me of some like memory back in the recesses of my brain, which Sofia Coppola did in fact date Quentin Tarantino in 2003. I felt like she did this for him. Also, like, I love right away, like, this casting is magnificent. Cailee Spaeny is very tiny. She is a very convincing teenager, even though she is an adult woman now, but she looks very age appropriate. I've watched, for whatever reason, a lot of Elvis-based entertainment, and I feel like Priscilla has never looked like a teenager in this way. So
she looks freshly hatched.
She's got a wonderful expressive face. She seems pretty unhappy at the Air Force Base. It must have been so lonely.
One of the things I was wondering about is why doesn't she have a Texas accent? But I guess if she was an Army brat, she would have grown up all over.
Yeah.
And another fact about her is that the man that you see here as her dad is not her biological father. He died in the war, and then her mother met this man who raised her as his own.
Her mother is also played by Dagmara Dominiczyk, who is the only competently portrayed publicist in the history of ever on Succession, and is a stunningly beautiful woman. And she's also tall. Like the way that they play with size in this, you really like get the sense of her being a child. She's hanging out and a soldier walks up to her and asks if she wants to go to Elvis's house.
He introduces himself and he invites her to Elvis's. Can't he see how young she is? And her parents are unenthused.
This is a super weird situation. And I'm going to talk a lot about grooming in this. And I was reminded of the Michael Jackson documentary about his victims, Wade Robison and James Safechuck, and the way that Michael Jackson groomed an entire family. And you feel like that's kind of what happened here. Elvis used his Elvisness to make it okay to invite a 14-year-old girl to his house to a party.
What is wrong with him that he wants a 14-year-old? And what comes across to me is that he wants a blank slate that he can mold, who is going to be all about him. Does she say anything clever? No, she's 14. Do we see her having any interests or being especially talented or in any way remarkable? No. And again, she's 14. And it's just revolting to me that that's what men want.
Well, that's what Elvis wanted. The most charitable interpretation is that even with all of this fame and success, like he himself was kind of childlike. And not particularly sophisticated. So he might have seen himself as younger than he was. But you know, at the end of the day, I can't make excuses for it. It's creepy. It's predatory. She's 14 and she looks 14. There's a charitable conclusion. And even in that, it's not charitable because like it's statutory rape and it's icky. And you're a 24-year-old man. And I don't know what you want with a 14-year-old girl except something icky. You know, if you're an adult male and you need to seek out the company of a child to feel powerful, you're probably not that bright of a dude anyway. And maybe you shouldn't be out engaging in like consensual adult relationships if you're, you know, an adult man and you're like, I need to be with someone who is young so I can control them and I can seem smart next to them. Because even though like I love Priscilla Presley, let me be clear, a 14-year-old is a 14-year-old and 14-year-olds are stupid.
So they've met at this party. He wants to see her again. And her parents quite naturally are like, what is wrong with him? But they let her date him. He gives her pills to help her stay awake. And you had some notes on this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have to say, like, one of Sofia Coppola's most spectacular gifts is that she can make art that looks so cool while also truly revealing how gross something is. Like, I'm like, look how cool she looks walking down the hallway in a montage, listening, you know, with Crimson and Clover on, because she is being groomed and seduced by an adult man who has no business being involved with her. And Elvis is saying stuff like, oh, you're so different, which is something that I feel like groomers say a lot to younger women. He's telling her like that his late mother would have liked her. And I remember Shelley Winters playing his mother in John Carpenter's Elvis TV movie, and I really don't think that Elvis's mother would have liked Priscilla.
Yeah, I saw part of the Baz Luhrmann. I didn't pick up how his mother would have felt. Either way, he loved his mother very much. It's sad that she died when she did, but so one thing, it makes it look like he didn't call her for like 2 years, which he did call her periodically during this time. Actually, this is going to get one of my highest accuracy scores ever because it hews very closely to its source material. And there are authorities on Elvis who had a thing or two to quibble with, but my defense would be that it is Priscilla's story and it's more neglect by omission and it's not part of this story.
They're seeing each other for a bit here. He gives her a gold watch for Christmas. Then he has to leave and they're going to keep in touch by mail. This movie does an amazing job moving those 2 years along with the calendar and with like the cycle of her life. I loved this so much. Her mom saying, maybe it's time to forget about him. He's probably with women his own age, which, yeah, he should be. Everyone should be with people their own age. Like, I'm not saying like she needs to do like all the heteronormative bullshit of like proms and football players and whatever, but definitely like be with other people who aren't allowed to drink yet in America. I know you're in Germany right now, but like, just like be among your peer set.
Well, how is some high school boy going to compete with Elvis?
I mean, how is some high school boy going to not only compete with Elvis, but compete with Elvis as played by Jacob Elordi?
Who really gets the whole mumble, mumble, oh ma'am, mumble, mumble, ma'am.
He does.
Really down.
This was the least cartoonish performance of Elvis I've ever seen. He was very much a human being in this. Also, again, like thinking about sizes, Jacob Elordi, I think, is like 8.5 feet tall.
Yeah.
And you feel like his largeness in contrast to her. And also, he's probably better looking than the actual Elvis. I was thinking about as we were watching this, like, is it safe to name your child Elvis again?
It's a name that you give your dog.
I feel like it hangs a pretty heavy set of expectations on you.
I don't know. Do people name their kid Elvis in the South?
Maybe. I guess like it means your kid could either become a rock icon or a pill popping.
Yeah, I think your kid is likelier to become a meth dealer these days if you name them Elvis.
Someone who shoots at his television sets.
So
there's sunglasses inside.
Put a pin in shooting at the television set.
He eventually calls her up and says, like, can you come visit me in Graceland? Her parents make him send a plane ticket and she flies. I think she flies first class.
I saw that and it made me appreciate the glamour of what flying used to be because you see those Pan Am tickets and you see like that typed letter from Vernon Presley.
I had a whole thing here where I was like, oh, is dad still alive? And I would get all of like the tragic things that happened to Elvis confused. Mm-hmm. I forget that his twin died at birth. Forgot that his dad was still alive. Thought like his dad died too, possibly also eaten in the womb by Elvis. So I can't imagine how much that must psychologically tweak you if you have a twin who doesn't make it out.
Okay.
Anyway, she goes to Graceland. She shows up there. Elvis sets her up in his room, which is one of like those, it's just like the nastiest ass bachelor parlor, like filled with like stuffed panthers and dark furniture and a bed that looks like it might rotate. We don't see it doing that.
And velvet curtains. It's
Graceland is like you've seen The Jerk, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Graceland is essentially the house in The Jerk.
The part of The Jerk that stands out to me is when he says, "You mean I'm going to stay this way?"
Oh, God. Such a good movie. I'm going to quote John Mulaney again when he talked about how Donald Trump is like what a hobo's idea of a rich person is. Graceland is like what someone who grew up with with no taste thinks is the highest level of taste. He's immediately like, why don't we go to Vegas?
And she looks so tiny next to him.
I'm like, no, don't get on a plane with him. But she does, and they go to Vegas.
Prior to this, it's her first night, and he gives her 500 milligrams of, what is the name of this pill? I don't know, but it knocks her out for 2 days, which is what I was like, she could have died.
And they go to Vegas, they have a great time, and he gives her even more pills there. And she's dressing really inappropriately for her age. And then she has to go home.
Talking.
I loved this visual of her flying back into Germany and getting off the plane, crying, mascara running down her face in like a white dress, and her parents seeing her and being like, why did you choose our daughter, Elvis?
She writes about how her parents liked her to look very fresh-faced, and she had on all this heavy makeup.
She gets home and she's like having a hard time giving her crap about school because she's dating Elvis. I wanted to ask a question here because I know that the lore is that Elvis basically had sex with her once and got her pregnant on their wedding night and then refused to touch her ever again, essentially.
Oh.
I also read that wasn't true. It seems like Priscilla has gone back and forth on this a little bit, and I wanted to clarify if there's a clarification to be had.
She wrote in her journal, "But I've been lonely for him since the baby's birth. He is still withdrawn. It's been 2 months, and he still hasn't touched me. I'm getting concerned." Yeah, it was months before he made love to her again. He couldn't process a woman being a mother.
Did they wait until they were married to have sex?
They waited until they were married to have sex. They did a bunch of other stuff. You see them being playful and her wearing different outfits. So I'm sure there's like a long menu of things that went along with that Catholic schoolgirl outfit that we joke about with Catholic schoolgirls.
Yeah, I get you.
He doesn't seem to have been dissatisfied, but he's Elvis.
I know the folklore of him being like, I can't have sex with a mother or possibly a woman that I've had sex with before. I wanted to clarify. Anyway, she gets home. She's not interested in school. Elvis calls up and is like, I need you. Her parents are able to be convinced to allow her to move back to the United States, to Graceland, which is totally cool and normal because Elvis needs her.
Yeah, I don't know how they could process that. I don't know how anyone would let their daughter do that. And she looks so young. And you noted he gives her a dog. Buying someone a dog as a present without discussing it first is a terrible gift. You don't know if they're going to like the dog. You don't know if they're going to like looking after the dog. It is probably a good idea for you and whoever will be taking care of the dog to discuss what sort of dog best fits your lifestyle needs. Although I guess if that dog had proven to be hyper, again, he's Elvis. They can hire someone to walk the dog, I guess, if it needs like 3 hours. And it seems like a very sweet dog. But
it does.
One of the surest ways to make sure that the dog you are giving as a gift will wind up in the shelter is to just give someone a dog as a surprise.
I mean, it's another act of like non-consent to chain her down, and it's also the only friend she's allowed to have.
Yes, she doesn't make friends at this school, and you can see she's bored. She's not interested in her studies. And there's one point where she's like, can I get this job? And he's like, I don't want to be with a career woman. And it's like just an after-school job so that she won't get bored. He wants someone who will be a blank slate, who will be completely about him.
This isn't romantic. This is a weird like power dynamic where she's not allowed to really have anything. And then he starts sort of designing her look.
Yes, he takes her shopping and, okay, I have to give them this. He's right. She shouldn't wear prints. She's tiny. They look bad on her. And there's one point later in the film where she wears this like 60s print thing that just doesn't look good on her at all. And it's sort of like she's wearing it to needle him, I thought. He wants her to dye his hair black like his. He's making her look like him, which is weird and which is something that I've heard men do when they're like isolating a woman, is have her dress like them.
Yeah, it's creepy. And also she's wearing he's putting her in clothing that is very Real Housewives of Palm Beach clothing. Like it's very sophisticated. Her hair is huge. He buys her a gun to match her outfit. And then he buys her more guns that also match her outfits. And then we see the playfulness of the relationship. And then he hits her for the first time. We see them shooting things. This is like very much a movie where not a whole lot happens, but we are very much shown a world where we see how isolated she is all the time. She graduates high school by cheating because she's not interested in studying and she's doing a lot of drugs with Elvis. He goes out to Las Vegas to shoot Viva Las Vegas with Anne Margaret, who he's maybe having an affair with, although he kind of denies it. He has affairs with loads of women and really controls her by not letting her be around when he's shooting a movie and keeps her separate from his professional life. He also throws a chair at her. We see act of violence against a piece of furniture, which we know is
a common trope of the biopic. Why must all these innocent pieces of furniture suffer for the artist?
He also starts like a Bible study group where it seems like he's also maybe picking up women. Is it? And then they try acid together.
Oh, in the book, there's a thing where he's having the Bible study group and he's hitting on women. So she decides she's going to kill herself and takes a bunch of pills, but wakes up the next day anyway. And she's so young.
She's so young. And they take LSD together. And then he decides to give up on whatever sort of like weird, like trip that he's been on about like not having sex with her because of the Bible.
Also, they weren't married yet. He was on some weird spiritual trip. And honestly, spirituality is always boring, hearing people talking about God and finding God. It's just so boring. And I don't blame her for telling him, like, I'm bored, I have needs. And he's like, I see a mad woman.
I think that it is going back to Jay McInerney from our Gia episode. I think he is the one who pointed this out at some point, where there's celebrities who didn't go to college who kind of feel like they have to do their messy education that you usually confine within the walls of an institution out in public. This is like very much Elvis's messy, like, am I a raver? Am I a cocaine person? Am I gay? Am I this? Am I that? Like era where I'm like, usually we confine this to a quiet place, ideally before social media.
In the meantime, he is making terrible movies. And one thing we saw earlier is that he wanted to take classes at Actors Studio. He was a huge admirer of Brando and James Dean, and he wanted to make good movies, and he wanted to make good music. He hated the songs they were sending him. I sent you that clip from Harem Scarum. Initially he was like, oh, I look like Valentino, this is going to be fun. And then he saw the script. Like, he knew he was making Drek. And when Elvis was allowed to pick his own material, he was great. But like, the Colonel didn't even like music. And if there is a villain in any Elvis story, it is never Elvis. It is always the Colonel. Like, he wanted to record with Lieber and Stoller wrote things. The Colonel went out of his way to isolate him from them after he got back from West Germany, because the Colonel liked him to record music by people where he was getting a cut. He's still like one of the most successful recording artists of all time, even with a huge amount of Drek that he made.
Yeah. That's too bad that he wasn't able to do more Lieber and Stoller stuff, because that music is really a good fit for him.
One of the things that we learned listening to A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs is that most of his critical reputation rests on what he did at Sun Studios.
And then he proposes to her, and in the background is the music from Badlands or True Romance, depending on where you are on your film study journey.
Mm-hmm.
And they get married. It is the tackiest wedding. Holy shit.
This wedding dress has been created multiple times.
Like, is it kitsch?
She thought the dress was beautiful. What I don't get is she had someone pose as her fiance and go dress shopping with her. The man is not supposed to see you in the dress before the wedding. It's bad luck. Everyone knows this. I don't get it.
I mean, all bets are off with this marriage.
I think the dress looked better in person because she said it was like hand beaded underneath the layer, and there was a lot of detail going on that doesn't like read on camera, but it's now an exhibit at Graceland. They're not actually going to let anyone wear it for the movie, so...
Nor should they.
Yeah, it's just curious to me that it's been recreated twice when they could just rent the previous one.
And then Elvis kissing Nancy Sinatra is over the fold news,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty wild. I was like, wow. Front page, top of the fold news, Elvis kissing Nancy Sinatra. Then we see him go into his comeback era, where he films the famous TV special, and they're watching that. So they get married. It's hella tacky. And then she gets pregnant immediately. She is an after-school special, like where they say, like yes, you can get pregnant the first time.
She gets pregnant really quickly, and he's done something before, like he gets mad at her, and he's like, "Okay, you need to leave," and she's sobbing as she packs, and then he like retracts it. But you can see that she's growing up because he says we need to separate when she's like 7 months pregnant, and she just looks at him and she's like, "You got it." And then he's terrified. Like, he just wants to play push me, pull you so that he can see her be upset.
Ione Skye had this quote where she was talking about how being in a relationship with a rock star is similar to being like in a relationship with an invalid, where you have to kind of carry them around and treat them very delicately, like a sack of sugar. Then she gives birth to Lisa Marie, and she is now parenting in complete isolation. And when we're just kind of drifting through all this, she sort of like starting to kind of find herself a little bit. We see that famous family photo getting taken where he's like sitting there in the wicker chair with his sunglasses on in the house, acting completely normal.
She mentions this in the book that, like, as she started to find herself, she's like got less flashy, and you see like her hair is its normal color. She's not wearing a ton of makeup anymore. But she also talks about how she realized from this that she needed to parent Lisa more because Lisa was so used to being around nurses and nannies that she couldn't like act normal for a family photo. There was a note on Elvis and guns. There's a part in the book where she's talking about what things Elvis liked or didn't like when it came to other recording artists. And there was a note. He couldn't abide singers who were, in his words, all technique and no emotional feeling. And in this category, he firmly placed Mel Torme and Robert Goulet. They were both responsible for 2 television sets being blown away with a 357 Magnum. Like, this is just, on the one hand, I don't like Mel Torme or Robert Goulet's music either. Robert Goulet is, yes, a joke, but just the way that she places the responsibility on them for Elvis shooting the TV, rather than changing the channel.
Yeah. Change the channel. I get it, I guess, with Robert Goulet, but like also like these are 2 very inoffensive artists, like who aren't a threat to him. I'm just saying, if you're going to shoot the television, why wasn't it Mick Jagger?
Elvis had good taste in music, at least, not in home furnishings.
Indeed. But if you're gonna be angry at an artist, like it seems like kind of misdirected for him to be angry at Mel Torme.
It's innocuous. I understand wanting to shoot people for being innocuous.
Of all the things to upset you, like it feels like kind of like punching down. I'm like, Mel Torme has a lane and he is staying in it. He is not a threat to you, Elvis. Like Paul McCartney, 100%. Like John Lennon would probably make him feel really bad about himself if he ever met John Lennon. Bob Dylan would also probably make him feel bad about himself. Like, I'm just saying, like, of people to be intimidated and angered by.
I don't think he was intimidated. It was that he was annoyed. He didn't like their music. No, I think it makes total sense to want to shoot the television if you see Robert Goulet. It's just that most of us can't go buy a new TV.
His motivations will forever be mysterious to us.
It was bad music. I completely understand his motivations.
Yeah, I guess like this comes down to like a sort of a fundamental divide about what would motivate us to take violence against an electronic in our home. I guess we're gonna just have to agree to disagree on.
I think we're just fundamentally different people on this. I understand Elvis wanting to shoot Robert Goulet. If you hate what you're seeing on TV and you can just buy a replacement television, even if you have the money to be among the first Americans to have a remote for your TV, why not just shoot the TV? I guess we're never going to agree on good reasons for shooting a TV. I mean, again, this is destruction of property, a common trope of the biopic.
Yes. So Priscilla starts taking karate lessons and she will eventually get into an affair with her karate instructor and maintain a relationship with him afterwards. He was a catalyst of sorts to get her to finally leave the marriage. She's kind of evolving as a person. She goes to Vegas to see him in his Vegas shows. His Vegas shows look like just like a nightmare.
I think, he enjoyed it at first and then he got bored, but he was a cash cow. It was like he was in a cycle that he couldn't get off of.
If I recall correctly from the never unrealistic or playing with fiction and nonfiction Baz Luhrmann movie, like the Colonel basically like sells him into indentured servitude to the Tropicana.
Elvis didn't like to read contracts.
Not a great way to be if you're going to be an artist.
Elvis would sign anything that you put in front of him. If you look at what happened to black artists of the era, why are we talking about the cut that the Colonel took when so many black artists got even worse deals? This podcast is being dominated by a man who is quite wisely left off screen.
Yes.
Because this is a portrait of a marriage.
Yes.
And unequal marriage.
It's a portrait of an unequal marriage, and it's a portrait of a woman who basically like gets taken hostage for a bunch of years.
Well, I was thinking, sometimes when you're in middle school and high school, you have a crush on like the handsome younger teacher. But if he actually does anything you're thinking about, he will have ruined you.
Even more than ruining you, he will have ruined his own life.
Yes, you don't want the hot for teacher fantasies to come true.
She would not. It's up to the person who is got the fully formed frontal cortex that enables them to be allowed to rent a car to put the brakes on that, not to chase it.
Like, thank God none of the teachers I had crushes on ever made my dreams come true. That's not a dream, that's a nightmare.
The kind of person that you want them to be wouldn't be chasing after a teenager.
Exactly. But Elvis went after a teenager.
But yeah, she goes out to see him in Vegas. He kind of tries to, seems like maritally rape her maybe as they're fighting. And then she says that she's leaving.
Oh yes, about that night, she writes, I went upstairs filled with curiosity, and when I arrived in the suite, I found Elvis lying in bed, obviously waiting for me. He grabbed me and forcefully made love to me. It was uncomfortable and unlike any other time he'd ever made love to me before, and he explained, this is how a real man makes love to his woman. This was not the gentle, understanding man that I grew to love. He was under the influence, and with my personal growth and new realities, he had become a stranger to me. I wept in silence as Elvis got up to dress for the show.
Okay, that sounds like rape.
Yeah, but I think however she framed this in 1985, they film it differently because we see this differently now than how she saw it when she wrote it in 1985.
Yeah.
And shortly after, she leaves him and he says, like, another time, another place, and it's just sad. And I guess it sort of like cuts off with her leaving Graceland. So they don't go into the death. They don't go into that. They were great friends after the divorce. And I think she always loved him. From reading it, you can tell.
Yeah. And I mean, and maybe that like is what kind of propelled her to want to protect his legacy. I mean, also the fact that she was the mother of his child.
His heir, yeah.
And wanted to protect her father, you know, Lisa Marie's father.
That the back half of it kind of dragged, and I couldn't quite say how. Sometimes Sofia Coppola gets into this like dream state where it becomes soporific. Like the first half, there was this like incredulity around, God, he's actually taking this very young girl.
Yeah.
I didn't really have any choice dialogue. I had stuff where I thought, should I write that down? You know what? I'll write that down when I do the second viewing for note-taking, and then I didn't get around to it. You know, one thing, it captures the fun of being in Elvis's gang when things are good.
Yeah.
I don't think we mentioned that.
Yeah, I feel like the back half was, I mean, yeah, like sometimes like things start to move slowly in her work because the back half is kind of a descent of her outgrowing him without really understanding that's what's happening, and in a really kind of quiet way sort of like recognizing how kind of unacceptable this like sort of house playing that they were doing was. And, you know, and it's like she drove out of that gate and she went on to have like a very interesting life so far. It's not even done yet. She's watched over that estate like a hawk.
Yeah, she extricated that estate from the colonel. Like,
that had to take some doing.
Oh my gosh. So there was not much awards talk on this one. There was a Golden Globe nomination.
Yeah. And the Venice Film Festival's Volpe Cup for Best Actress went to Cailee Spaeny, and I think very, you know, well deserved. A really, really lovely performance that she gave in this. And she has to carry the whole film on her back, and she does so. It's a really elegant performance. I love the performances that Sofia Coppola gets out of her actresses, you know, just because they're not loud. Every performance that actresses give in her movies are sort of like Michael in Godfather 2. They're very quiet, and it's all in their faces, and it's always so interesting to watch the work that she does with actresses and the way that their stories take center stage in her work, even though like there's a remoteness and you can't quite always really figure out what's going on beneath the surface. It's like the mystery is kind of spectacular. I think that this was a really accomplished performance for someone who is so young as a performer and had to be in like every shot of the film.
She evolves on camera from a very young girl into a woman almost 30.
I mean, you imagine living that much life before you're 30?
Crazy. All right. So shall we get into scoring this thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to give you a quick explainer on how we rate and score our movies. We rate our movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to specific issues, particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes.
I would also highly recommend listening to our special introductory episode, Introduction, who are we and what are we doing? Where we give a rundown of the methodology, why it matters to us, and some of the inspirations behind this podcast.
And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
Okay. So for outward appearances, I gave it a 9.
I give it a 10.
For acting and casting, I gave it a 7.
I gave it a 9.
I thought she was carrying the whole thing. For passage of time, I gave it an 8. I always knew where and when we were.
Same, 8.
For costuming, 8 again.
I gave it a 9.
For quality of the script, I gave it a 6.
Same.
It was a decent script. It just wasn't. For accuracy, I gave it an 8. It hewed very closely to what Priscilla has had to say. And there are various quibbles where there are people who are specialists on Elvis. But as you know, 8 is a very, very high accuracy score coming from me.
I gave it a 7.
Okay, that's still close enough. For storytelling, I gave it a 5. It's pretty straightforward. I touched on this, like some of Sofia Coppola's work. There's just a sleepy quality to it where, and when I say a sleepy quality, I mean I get bored.
I gave it a 6.
Production value, I gave it a 7.
I gave it a 9.
I thought things looked good, but just not remarkable. And it's also because you're more of a 20th century woman and I'm a costume drama person. For production, direction, decision making, I gave it a 6 because, like I said, kind of bored in the back half.
I gave it an 8.
For do we care, I gave it a 5.
I gave it a 6. Same. There's a lot of questions I have. There were things that I wanted more information about that were not part of the narrative here.
Well, but I liked that it was compact, it was intimate, it was a different take because it was through her eyes and it did not allow the men to overtake the story. So with that, my average came to 6.9.
Mine came to 7.8. Yeah, I would say too, like something that this movie really accomplished. We talked about the Colonel a fair amount, but he's a nefarious monster and a source of endless fascination.
Mm-hmm.
But this movie accomplished something really tricky, which was that it made it about her, even though Elvis is right there. Like it didn't make it like Elvis through the eyes of Priscilla. It was about Priscilla.
So it's actually a reasonable example of a film being dominated by female gaze, which is rare and worth appreciating.
Probably no coincidence that it had a female director.
And should I feel bad about being bored? Because I don't, and that had nothing to do with it having a female director. I was just bored.
Sometimes her movies take on a very meditative quality that you have to be in the right frame of mind for.
Or you have to be someone who likes films with a meditative quality, which I'm not. We didn't do the average of the scores. 7.35. Sorry, Priscilla, you did not earn a second opinion, which is the thing that we do where if a film earns above an 8 or below a 4, we read contradictory user reviews from IMDb.
I bet every one of those reviews complains about why there isn't Elvis music in this movie. Beautiful, deliberate choice.
I think so, because if Priscilla was executive producer, they could have used it if they wanted to.
Like anachronistic music. Like you don't hear me complaining about needle drops in this episode.
So, Sarah, can you take us out?
Of course, I'd be happy to. Is there anything that we want to recommend before we jump out, by the way?
Sure, I guess, well, I preferred Rocket Man.
It's a lot more fun.
Yeah, and this isn't meant to be, like, the same thing. Look up the trailers for Elvis's terrible movies are very memorable, especially that one for Harem Scarum that I sent you, which is so bad.
It's amazing how bad those movies are. I don't know if you've ever even tried to watch some of them. Like they're nigh unwatchable.
That trailer is nigh unwatchable. If I had to make those movies, I'd do drugs too. I can't blame him.
When you read the scenarios of what the movies are, it's astonishing. It's like, how did you even come up with something this terrible? It's possible to make good movies. He maybe wanted to be in the Barbra Streisand remake of A Star Is Born.
Yes, I saw about that. The Christopherson role.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stories about whether or not he was like not physically capable of taking the role. / the colonel wouldn't let him. The truth is probably somewhere in the fuzzy middle of that. Having seen that movie more than once and it being my favorite, A Star Is Born, I know. Christopherson's so gorgeous. Like, I can't even imagine why you would want anyone else in that movie. But who knows what other like reasonably good movies Elvis had the chance to be in that they're like, no, you're going to make this movie where you play twins.
There is a backstage story in Elvis and Me about Barbra Streisand.
Oh, she wanted to get with him, right?
Hold on. One night we visited Barbra Streisand backstage at the International Hotel, now the Hilton. It was a classic Streisand performance, and Elvis, after a few too many Bloody Marys, wanted to tell Barbara his impressions. We were ushered backstage into her dressing room, and Elvis's first words upon meeting her were, "What did you ever see in Elliot Gould? I never could stand him." In typical Streisand, she retorted, "What do you mean? He's the father of my child," leaving Elvis speechless.
I mean, he's not wrong.
I would have thought that Elliot Gould was in your Venn diagram because he's a weird Jewish character actor.
He is a weird... I wonder why he's not in my Venn diagram. Maybe it's like too much mustache.
He doesn't always have a mustache, though.
No. And I do love The Long Goodbye. Maybe I need to think about my statement here. Because I love The Long Goodbye so much. And I do love MASH. I do love him in Ocean's 11. You know what? No, I take it back. Elvis is wrong. Elliot Gould is foxy and absolutely in my wheelhouse. You're that.
One more thing, Sarah. Outro time.
Oh, thank you. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @Biopic a Podcast Story. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of our movies that we've done so far. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
And we also now have a Blue Sky account and a Threads account. We aren't bothering with Twitter, they're dying, and so far we're not bothering with Facebook. But tune in next week when we'll be talking about the private life of Henry VIII, and welcome to the show, Charles Laughton.
Welcome to the show, Charles Laughton.
Anne of Cleves is my favorite Henry VIII wife, and she's played by Elsa Lanchester, who is also Mrs. Laughton and also the Bride of Frankenstein.
I'm excited to see Merle Oberon because I love her.
Like,